Hello, everybody. This is a very warm welcome to all of you on the most magnificent Ballarat day. I'm in my office here in Ballarat and I've got some guys behind me in a room vacuuming, and I have had a few little technical issues with the laptop, but other than that, things are great. Thank you so much for attending what is going to be a very exciting 90 minutes. I just want to do a few little housekeeping bits and pieces before we start, and that is that this is a sort of a great way to do a webinar because I can see everyone, which is wonderful. I've done a few recently where I'm just staring at myself, which is very difficult to see how people are reacting. So it's great to be able to see some people on screen. I would ask you initially if you could mute, and I note that most of you are, and that just helps with any background noise. This is a 90-minute webinar, and I would encourage you to pop your comments and questions into the chat box when you feel you would like to, and there will be a time after the keynote when I will ask you to pop your comments and questions in the chat box for our panel. Okay, so Adult Learning Australia acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to First Nations people, their elders past, present and emerging. ALA recognises the unique place in Australian history and society of First Nations people and supports the adoption of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I sit here, as I said to you, in Ballarat, and this is Wadawurrung country. I would encourage you to put the country of where you're located, if you know what country that is, and share it with our with everybody present today. I would also, before we begin, encourage you please to tweet, get onto social media and use the hashtag ALA60 throughout the event. That would be great. The more of you that do that, the merrier. All right, so today our webinar is looking back, casting forward 60 years anniversary. And it's an extraordinary celebration, an impressive achievement that ALA is turning 60 or has turned 60. It is impressive because adult learning and adult education is part of the deep fabric of this country. And 60 years of ALA's involvement in adult learning is an important part of the fabric of the country. We celebrate 60 years anniversary in a year of, you would all agree, significant challenge, both in Australia and across the world. Adult learning and adult education plays a critical role, and we all know that, in terms of social cohesion, in terms of connecting learning with health and to health and well-being. It provides pathways for people to learning and to education. And it underpins the importance of literacy and numeracy. So it's deeply important to the fabric of the country. Adult learning and education provides opportunities for a diverse range of people. And we know that it's important for older people. We know it's important for young people. We know it's important for vulnerable groups and for people with disability. Adult educators work with Indigenous people, with migrant people, and with a whole lot more that I haven't mentioned, but that highlights the importance of the diversity in which Adult Learning Australia is involved. I think it's important, and in some ways it might be poignant, to contemplate the fact that the 60th anniversary has occurred in a year such as this. I think that it's important to consider how might we garner the strength of adult learning and its opportunity for approaches that might involve equitable and sustainable ways of working with community. What we do know about adult learning in this country, that it works bottom up. It works within the community and for the community. And I think there are lessons for both government in terms of its work across the country and lessons in terms of bringing people together in equitable ways for sustainability. For what will be an unknown future, but a post-COVID future. And we believe that adult education has a very critical role in all of that. Today, we bring a forum of experts and practitioners together in the field of adult learning from across Australia to exchange their views and examples of the power of adult learning and education in changing times, and what needs to be done to generate success. Also, what needs to be done to look to the future post-COVID. So I'm very excited about today. I'm looking forward to listening and engaging with the people, our practitioners and experts, and I would encourage you to do so as well. So it is without further ado that I have the greatest pleasure, where are you, Barry? Can I see you? To introduce Adjunct Professor Barry Golding. Barry and I have known each other for many years, and Barry is a colleague and a friend of mine. And I had a look at his bio, and it's very impressive. So I'm going to have to read bits of it, Barry, to introduce you.
Make it brief, it's okay.
So Professor Golding is associated with the School of Education here at Federation University, and Barry worked in the School of Education with myself for many years. Barry is well known to many of you. He's an international and national researcher, has done extensive work in the area of men's sheds, men's health and well-being, and more broadly, the importance of education and lifelong learning for health and well-being. So it's with my greatest pleasure that I introduce Professor Barry Golding.
Thank you, Annette. I just acknowledge, like Rob Townsend, I'm on Djadjawurrung country. I acknowledge in my paper that's coming out in AGL this week that Australia has a long history of learning for life going back 60,000 years. I'm not going to address it in this talk, but I think it's important to acknowledge that adult education didn't start, and learning for life didn't start in Australia in 1960 or 1950. And I think we need to get better at acknowledging that. I'll be asking Georgia to change the slide at different times. So Georgia, if you could go on to the next slide, please. As I start, I'd like to thank Jenny and Annette and everyone from Australia, members. Apparently there's around 80 of us involved. Particularly warm welcome to people from overseas, Neve, Nani, Colin, Alex, Brian Finzen, Rob Mark, Roger Harris, I saw before. They were actually on our research reference group for our project. So to come to the first slide, before 1950, most adult education, certainly white education in Australia, was something of a dog's breakfast. This is an Australian technical term. And you'll see on the bottom of the slide, much of it was organised in very diverse ways, mainly organised and managed by men. And I think we've got a slide of the typical sort of scene Next slide, thanks, Georgia. I think that's Duncan in the first row, in the middle of the first row. He was the person who, in 1944, wrote what was known as the Duncan Report, which was the basis of a lot of early thinking in adult education during the 1960s. The Duncan Report wasn't actually published until 1973. It was never implemented, but that's Duncan, and that's his heritage. Next one, thanks, Georgia. So to come to what we're celebrating in terms of 60 years today, the Australian Association of Adult Education was formed in 1960. I won't read all of the slides. You can read what's on the screen. But I do acknowledge here that, again, we owe a huge debt to a New Zealander, Arnold Healy, who was from New Zealand but was then at University of Adelaide, who played an important role in welding the diverse and disputing factions, mainly old men, together. And Arnold Healy was actually its first editor, the journal's first editor, which was then called the Australian Journal of Adult Education. And he went back to New Zealand and died reasonably early on. He didn't live all that long. But can I just also acknowledge that Arnold Healy was also instrumental in creating ASPE. And when you read the documentation of the early start of ASPE, his perspective as a New Zealander, including First Nations people in New Zealand, was very important in terms of forming what became ASPE, the Asia South Pacific Basic Adult Education Forum, which is still very active. And Robbie, of course, is with us, and Nani are very much involved in that. Next one, thanks, Georgia. Here's the first meeting of AAAE. You'll see in those days men smoked pipes inside. There wasn't a lot of women, but this is a typical sort of scene. The women were wearing hats, the men had ties. Next slide, please, Georgia. So AAAE lobbied for a national system of adult education. And ironically, its first annual conference theme was Adult Education, the Nation's Responsibility. And 60 years on, the nation still hasn't grasped the nettle. And I think we need to remember that we haven't really achieved what the original vision was. Next slide, please. This is just another photo of the scene in 1963, 57 years ago, up at the Warburton Chalet in the foothills of Victoria. Next one. So the 1960s were basically years of crisis for the fledgling association. There was a huge row over which organisation should take the lead and whether the old model of university provision of adult education should cease and whether the Workers' Education Association had its day. I might just go on to the next slide, I think. This is Joan Alsop, who in 1974 very presciently predicted that, quote, educational resources centres across Australia will be essential for all its citizens, not just as community centres, but as places of social and civic learning for all ages and at all times. And can I just acknowledge that during my childhood in Donald, in rural Victoria, I had a rich cultural upbringing as a consequence of the extension work of the then Council of Adult Education, which basically ceased to exist a few years ago, and as a standalone organisation. And a lot of really important early work was done during this period in the 1970s. So next slide, please. From 1975, there was quite a few changes. The biggest change probably in the mid-70s was the fact that the association made the decision to diversify its membership. Previously, it was mainly men who dominated the executive, and the associates were people who had an interest in the field, often practitioners. And in 1975, this distinction was abolished and branches became possible. And at that stage, the Australian Council of Adult Literacy was hived off and began operating independently of AAAE. Next one, thanks. 1979, there was basically the word community started to come into things, and the journal editor in 1979 complained that community education was being run up the mast, creating new confusions. There were two organisations. There was the Australian Association of Adult Education, and there was also the Australian Association of Community Education. And I love the quote at the end of this slide. It says, as you can read, participants assembled, gyrated and dispersed with no published or perhaps publishable proof that the fundamentals we possess had been mentioned, let alone explored in regional debate. There was just a whole lot of discord within the organisations involved at that stage. Next slide, thanks. 1980s was characterised by a lot of researchers and historians as a decade of women. In the 1980s, there was the emergence of a community-based adult education movement, particularly in Victoria, which had national implications. ACE in New South Wales sought to stimulate community agencies, as TAFE New South Wales pulled out of adult education. The WEA University of Sydney Alliance was finally severed. And then by, I think that should read 1979, that's my mistake, AAAE and AAACE merged in September 1979. And at that stage, AAACE Journal became the Australian Journal of Adult and Continuing Education with the new editor, Roger Harris. And can I just acknowledge the huge work that Roger did for the journal for around 25 years from that point. Thank you. Next slide. Here's a photo of some of the key people involved through 1999, 2001. The top one's actually got Tony Brown, who's second from the right, and you'll see young Tanya Plibasek second from the left. You'll see in the bottom slide, again, Tony Brown on the right-hand side with our former Liberal politician, Bronwyn Bishop, at the launch of the Seniors Third Age Kit in 2001. Next one, thanks. I would regard 1990 as the high watermark for adult education in Australia. There were basically two Senate reports, the Cummings Cinderella report in 1991 and the Beyond Cinderella report in 1997. Senate reports, 1991 was the year ACE was formally recognised in Victoria via the Adult Community and Further Education Act. There was the first Adult Learners Week in 95. UNESCO acknowledged the value of adult ed. And the journal changed again from the Australian Journal of Adult and Community Education to its current title, the Australian Journal of Adult Learning. So really by that stage, by 30 years ago, the organisation and the journal was pretty much as it is at the moment. Next one, thanks. You'll be able to read about all of this in the paper that's appearing in AJAL this week. It's a long peer-reviewed paper which I've written, which summarises all of this. This is just the quick and dirty, trying to squeeze it into 15 minutes. The National Association observed its 40th year in 2000, and there were several blasts from the past in the journal. There was another celebration in 2010, And the 2010 AGL issue 3 was full of historical and retrospective articles that Roger Harris ably organised. And also in 2011 was a special edition which featured Harris and Morrison's Through the Looking Glass in 2011. And that's really worth having a close look at alongside what I've written this year, because I haven't repeated what Harris and Morrison did. I've taken it 10 years further on, and I've gone back right through the journals to write this major piece of work that's appearing in AGL. Next one, thanks. You don't need to know that there's been widespread challenges to ACE and ALA in the past decade. We've had the widespread marketisation of VET in Australia and the rorting of the system by private providers and of the funds. We've had several states begin to withdraw even further from state-supported ACE programs providers. We had a broadband for seniors, which operated very successfully until it finished in 2017. You'll see there that ALA lost its core grant for national government, but continues to manage Adult Learners Week as a contract for national government. No one needs me to tease out the second last dot point. And I just note we still have no national system 60 years on. And just this week in Ballarat, just to ground it in reality, the Brace, the Ballarat Regional Adult and Community Education provider, the huge provider in the biggest inland city in Australia apart from Canberra, closes its doors in a few weeks' time after 50 years in Ballarat. And so we have no national system 60 years on, and a whole range of factors have conspired to lead many providers to hit a wall. So next slide, thanks. It's not all doom and gloom. I think the pandemic will certainly have a long tail that provides new opportunities for adult and community education. I think that ACE will continue to be inclusive of very diverse forms of learning beyond school, vet and higher education. And I think the key to its success is its accessibility and ability to transform individuals, families and communities. However, I do acknowledge that we'll have different emphases in different states and territories. For example, Queensland has almost no adult education that we would acknowledge, for example, here in Victoria. And I'm just throwing out as a hook that something like universal literacy and learning for wellbeing might be an interesting and positive possible future national slogan, because governments aren't going to support learning for learning's sake, but they will support learning which is economically rational. And I would argue that universal literacy and learning for wellbeing are positive things. And finally, I think that national and international networking will become increasingly important for ALA. And I take that as evidence of that, the way we work at the moment with ACE Aotearoa and with ASPE, and also with AONTAS in Ireland. So I haven't been following a clock, but I've tried to make it as snappy as possible because we started 5 minutes late. So I think on my running sheet, there's an opportunity for questions, which if we've got time, I'm happy to consider. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. That was fantastic. We didn't get to ring the bell, Jenny. We were looking forward to ringing the bell 3 minutes beforehand, but we didn't get an opportunity to do it. So thank you for sticking on time. So does anyone have any questions for Barry? And I'm really not great at doing the, Georgia is better at this than I am. While we're waiting for questions,
people
Barry,
can pop them in the chat if they like, Annette.
Yes. So Nicole, Barry asks, could Barry please expand what he meant, here we go, what he meant with his reference about the Queensland system not being recognised in Victoria?
I guess I'm saying that when I look at what the Queensland government says about adult and community education, they've got a lot of words, but they don't have a lot of money. I think it's very easy to create a website with platitudes and exhortations about adult education. I'm not saying that adult education doesn't take place in Queensland, but I'm saying if you're a researcher and trying to find it, it's like running down a rabbit burrow. It's not a unified national system, and the list of adult education providers that's on the Queensland website is a dog's breakfast of private providers and a whole host of different things, but there is no coordination, and there's not a lot of funding. And I stand by what I say. I just think adult education in a policy and a funding sense is largely missing now from many states and territories in Australia. Full stop. The evidence shows it.
Thanks, Barry. We have another question from Diana. Could you tell me more about why you think it would be valuable to have a national policy, and what would be important to have in such a policy?
Okay. I think the national policy would say that universal literacy is very important for a whole range of good reasons: social, economic, community, and that it's economically rational to support adult literacy. And also, it's very important for people to have high levels of literacy in order to cope with everyday life, to cope with information technology, to cope with health literacy, for example. We know from research that 2/3 of adults in Australia over the age of 60 are functionally illiterate. And this has huge implications for health, well-being, for community involvement, for people even to do simple things like registering for unemployment or ordering medicines or getting a new Medibank card or even checking your train timetable, because everything's online. And if you don't have literacy, you can't do it. So I just think the need for literacy and the need for learning to be universal and lifelong is even more critical in 2020 than it was in 1960.
Thank you for that, Barry. And we have time for one more question, and that one is, okay, I've lost it. There was one there, Georgia, about the library system. Can you?
Yep.
see
So Singleton Council has asked any comments on the value of public libraries in facilitating adult education.
I think public libraries have been more nimble than many other organisations, and in many places in Australia they've become de facto community centres, as other places where people gather for their social capital and community wellbeing have dropped away. I think libraries are incredibly important places for people to get access, for people to converse, for people to meet, and for people to access resources that should be available to everybody, but we know they're not. And so I think my answer is yes, they're incredibly important. Yep.
Thank you, Barry. And can I thank you on behalf of all of us for your really very interesting presentation. It's fascinating, really, and I'm sure people will look forward to reading it at length in the journal. So thank you so much. And I see Robbie is cheering. Thank you. So you can please, if you'd like to, put your hands up and virtually applaud. Thank you very much for that, and thanks, Barry.
Thank you, and I'll switch my mic off now. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so our next segment is our panel. We have 4 panel members that will speak. The first 2 panel members are actually a video. One is from Ireland and the other from the Philippines. So because of time issues, we have that they've been pre-recorded, and then 2 live presentations. So what we'll do is I will introduce each presenter, and then at the end of the panel review, we'll have some questions on the chat, please. So the first presenter is Niamh O'Reilly. Niamh is the CEO of AONTIS in Ireland, the National Adult Learning Organisation. Niamh is an educationalist and with expertise in educational equity, learner voice, community education, policy analysis, organisational development and governance. And if you want to read more about Niamh, you can see more information in the bio attached. So I'd like to now ask Georgia if she could pop Niamh's recording up.
Hi, I'm Niamh O'Reilly, CEO of AONTIS, the National Adult Learning Organisation in Ireland, wishing our counterparts down under Adult Learning Australia a very happy 60th birthday. Especially a big hello to my friend and colleague Jenny McCaffrey. We met last year, made a great connection, and look forward to working with you in the future. And also to the President, Annette Foley, and especially as well to Barry Golding, who helped celebrate 50 years of AONTIS last year. I'm here in the centre of Dublin, in the St. Stephen's Green, wishing you well, the land of saints and scholars, but obviously educational inequality is a big issue, so I want to talk about a vision for adult learning, how we can get there, and the importance of membership or peak bodies in working together for educational equality for all adults. So we'll take a trip around Dublin. I'm starting off here with James Joyce and my son, who's going to say a little few words now. Arnie. Hi! I'm standing outside the Mansion House in Dublin, where we held our first National Adult Learner Forum back in 2016. I think this is a really important point to make because learner voice is absolutely essential for really effective grassroots informed advocacy. And we really see that as key for adults being able to define what they need, how it should be offered to them. In a way, at Trinity College Dublin, an elite university, educational inequality is a real issue in Ireland. The lifelong learning participation rate is around 10.5%, but for people who left school early, it's around 3%. And our vision in AONTIS is that everybody can aspire to engage in education at any time in their lives. And what we hope is that people will be emboldened to see it as their right, to have their voice heard, and we see that primarily our job is ensuring that those who are the focus of policy are really at the table, their voice is heard. I'm standing on Pearse Street around the corner from Trinity College. The reason I'm standing here is I want to talk a little bit about community education in Ireland. There's a family resource centre just down the road, and it offers a really inclusive form of education that is open to all. It's really inspired by Freirean philosophy and bringing that inclusive pedagogy, which is based on dialogue, seeing where people are at, to the table. AONTIS runs a community education network of over 120 organisations across Ireland, and we see this as a really important method for engaging people in adult learning at any time in their lives. And in our final trip around Dublin, we're here at the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, as we ask ourselves a question: how do we get adult education on the political agenda? What we found as the most effective thing is to work with allies in academia, in further education, higher education, where we can leverage our influence, where we can strive collectively for education. So I'm going to end my presentation at my own home, which is my home office, and thinking about the adult learners who are engaging learning in a very different way now, online if they have a laptop, or indeed access to Wi-Fi or technological skills. But I feel very positive about, as we know, adult educators are incredibly innovative and have found ways to support learners to engage in a dialogic process that builds on their lived experiences, that creates peer learning communities, which we know are, the social aspect of learning is so important. So going forward, what we're hoping is to maintain that broad purpose of adult learning,
adult learning as a tool to address the big social challenges that we face, whether it's climate change, the rise of the right, and racism that has really been brought up and demonstrated, unfortunately, that we've seen the last number of months, of creating really good educational experiences for everybody, that gives them an opportunity to fulfill their educational aspirations, whether it's to move into employment, for their own personal development, and holding on to that broader purpose of learning. So the value of being part of a peak body is that you have your Irish cousins here in Ainthus, the supporters of Adult Learning Australia. We share in your achievements and your struggles, and the value of the collective to create a really strong movement where adult learning is seen as a right, and that we create an emboldened adult learning community where we start to really advocate and have our voices heard to ensure that every adult can get the best possible education experience. So unfortunately, I couldn't be there in the person. I hope I get to see you again, and just to know that we're going to work and support the work that you do over the next number of years in any way that we can. So I just want to say a final goodbye to Jenny McCaffrey and to President Annette Foley. Wish you very all the very best for the next 60 years. Bye.
That was fantastic. What a fantastic presentation. Lovely to see beautiful Dublin at the same time. So thank you so much, Neve. The next speaker will also be a video recording, and I do encourage you to pop some questions down for Neve and Nani, because we can provide those questions to them, and then we'd be able to, I'm sure, Jenny, upload the answers to those questions on our website, because it would be really interesting to engage with them and see what they have to say. So the next presenter, again, is a video recording. Nani Zalmanani. Nani is the incumbent president of ASPE and represents ASPE in the Executive Committee of the International Council for Adult Education as Vice President for the Asia Pacific. She is based in the Philippines. Nani has led and developed several initiatives on women's education for empowerment, but her outstanding contributions have been in her leadership in the NGO in Indonesia, PECA. So again, Georgia, if I could ask you to pop up Nani's presentation, thank you.
Dear colleagues from Adult Learning Australia, my name is Nani Zulminarni from Indonesia, and I'm the president of the Asia South Pacific Association for Basic and Adult Education, or ASBAE, and the vice president International Council for Adult Education, IKE, for Asia Pacific. It is my great pleasure on behalf of ASBAE and IKE to congratulate you on achieving your 60th birthday. Adult Learning Australia has much to celebrate and much to be proud of. To have survived for so long as a national peak civil society body for adult and community education in Australia speaks volumes about your members and your leaders' tenacity, persistence, and commitment to the cause. I remember in 1996, ALA hosted the second General Assembly of ASBAE in Darwin. It was my first direct involvement in adult education in general, and ASBAE particularly. As host, ALA exposed me to different activities of adult learning in Australia, which became one of most important experiences and inspiration for my long journey on adult education until now. But it is not just the fact that you have survived that is impressive. It is the quality of ALA's policy analysis, its report, its recommendation to government, and its numerous training events over the decades that ALA and all involved in it should be proud of. One of my staff from Indonesia was benefit from ALA exchange program several years back, so that she grows her leadership and capacity on adult education. ASBAE and ALA have had a long and mutually fruitful and supportive relationship over most of the 60 years. ASBAE began in Sydney in 1964, only a few years after ALA was formed, and ALA was a key organization involved in founding ASBAI and providing important support and contribution in those early years. Moving on a few decades, ALA in the 1990s and early 2000s hosted a desk in Australia for ASBAI's work, with the likes of Yvonne Hasselhoff as the editor of the ASBAI's Courier. In 1995, Dr. Alastair Crombie, the executive director of what was the AAACE, hired Bernie Lovegrove to work on ASBAI issue at the AAACE office in Canberra. ALA also hosted ASBAI's second General Assembly in Darwin in 1996, which was a massive undertaking. ALA has had members on ASBAI Executive Council on a number of occasions, including Dr. Alastair Crombie and later Dorothy Lucerdi, both providing their much appreciated experience and insight. Even though ASBAI Australia has a separate office to ALA, Bernie continues to this day to collaborate with the current ALA CEO Ginny McAfee, especially in relation to ACED, the Australian Coalition for Education and Development, and other international education issues. It is clear that ALA and ASBAI share a common spirit, vision, and passion for the advancements of adult and community education. And we face tough times ahead to fight to ensure there is a strong voice to promote and resource adult learning and education, both in Australia and internationally. This was the case even before the pandemic, but now we face additional challenges together when the funding for education is declining, especially adult learning and education, which has always been the poor cushion in education. We face many challenges such as the privatization of education, the unlearning and anti-science propaganda of mass media outlets, the rapid spread of fake news and conspiracy theories on social media, the loss of civil society spaces in many countries, the rise of populist and dictatorial leaders with large corporate support that are not called to account, and the rise of fundamentalism. More than ever, when so many people have lost their jobs due to the pandemic and many adults and children are missing out on education, we need to continue to advocate to ensure that the transformative power of adult learning education is seen as part of the world's solution, and that education is made available to those who have been left behind, especially youth, women, and people with disabilities. As we move towards the close of this extraordinary year, we at ASBAI and IKAE have every confidence that ALA will continue for many years to come to be a beacon of reasons, an advocate for the poorest, and enablers of transformative adult learning and education both in Australia and abroad. In this journey, you can be sure that ASBAI and IKAE stands alongside you in collaboration and solidarity. I and the entire ASBAI and IKAE family wish you all the very best as Adult Learning Australia celebrates 60 remarkable years. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nani. That was wonderful. Common spirit there. I think that's echoed from all of us, and an important part of adult community education across all of our countries, really. Again, I would encourage you to pop some questions for Nani into the comments, and we can again ask her to respond to those and pop those up on our website. So now to our live here presenters. I can see Colin there. So I'd like to introduce you to Colin McGregor. And Colin, thank you for being involved all the way from New Zealand. Thank you very much. Colin is the Director of Adult and Community Education ACE in Aotearoa. ACE Aotearoa is a non-governmental organisation. is the lead body for adult and community education in New Zealand. ACE Aotearoa supports providers through training, resources, conferences, and sharing best practices. And thank you, Colin. I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Whakataka te hao ki te iru, whakataka te hao te tonga, kia makina ki utu, kia matara ki tai, ki hei aka, ana ti atakura, hi tio, hi huko, hi hauhei, ti hei mariora. Welcome and thank you. The karakia I have just presented to you, I will just do it in English for you. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south, let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean, let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, the promise of a glorious day. Now in New Zealand we've had 3 glorious days. In 2017 the Labour government got elected. In 2020 that Labour government put extra funding into the ACE sector, and in 2020 that government got re-elected, so we're very happy. But before I go into what we're up to, I'd like to congratulate AAAE on its 60th anniversary. And never has adult and community education been more important than now. For us, AAAE has been a shining beacon for ACE in Australia and an inspiration for ACE Aotearoa. Our joint histories go back a long way, including attendance at each other's conferences, sharing of resources, and supporting activities such as the Getting of Wisdom conference held in Australia and New Zealand. During my time as director, I particularly valued the Australian Journal of Adult Learning, which provides intellectual clout to move ACE forward. We've also borrowed ideas from ALA, such as the environmental scan of the ACE sector, which we undertook in 2017. We also plan to make 2020 the year of lifelong learning, another idea from ALA. This has proved to be somewhat difficult due to COVID-19. We have a saying in New Zealand, He aha te mea nui o te ao. Maku I ki atu, hi tangata, hi tangata, hi tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. To survive 60 years in the ACE sector is a huge achievement and reflects strong commitment to the values and principles of adult community education. Resourcing the ACE from government is challenging and is only the focus of the people that keeps ACE functioning. So well done. I'd like now to talk about my vision for education in the future. It's a vexed topic. We've been very lucky in New Zealand to have a government that not only says it values ACE, but has put additional funding into it over the next 4 years. This government has just been re-elected with a massively increased majority. We have advantages. We have one government as opposed to a federal system. We've worked very hard across the political divide for many years to outline the value of ACE. And we have focused on improving the quality of ACE provision. There will always be tension between vocationally focused ACE and community focused ACE as a measurement of results is challenging. COVID-19 will also put pressure on the ACE sector. Whilst our government has a strong focus on well-being, it will be encouraging the ACE sector to step up and provide retraining and support for those who have lost their jobs. I see 3 trends. Firstly, a short-term strong focus on vocational courses, followed by a longer-term focus on social cohesion, including well-being, and also some debate and discussion on the value of community to a nation. What needs to happen to get there is a few things. As a nation, New Zealand has started by opening the discussion of well-being. We've had 2 well-being focused budgets, which is a really good sign of a belief in community. What we need to do is make the links between ACE and well-being transparent. There's not enough understanding across the nation of the value of ACE that ACE brings to social cohesion. It requires a focus on measuring and understanding the outcomes of ACE. It requires us to look outwards to prove the case, not relying on goodwill or good works to do the job for us. It requires building partnerships with industry, with other community groups, and with academia. Most of all, it requires a mind shift from passive receiver to active enabler. To be frank, this requires a marketing effort at the community, local body, and political level. And as to peak bodies are essential. Without us, it is highly unlikely that the government would have invested more in the sector or focused on our current policy development for ACE. We perform a valuable clearinghouse function for providers and a means of communication to and from government. We challenge the sector to up its game in terms of teaching standards, quality assurance and measurement of outcomes. We share good practice through conferences and other gatherings, and we are the body that coordinates sector celebrations such as the Festival of Adult Learning. I think without a peak body, it would be very easy to divide and rule ACE. Kia kaha. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you very much. So what we might do is we might just go now to Alex, and I would encourage people to pop their questions for Colin and Alex in the chat, or you may wish to simply ask the question. I'm sure that's fine as well. So if you'd like to actually speak and ask the question, you're welcome to do that as well. So what I'll do now is I will introduce the fourth panel member to the session. And this panel member is Alex Snow, and I can see Alex there. Alex is Director, Youth Employment and Enterprise Projects, the Foundation for Young Australians. Alex is an experienced non-for-profit leader, public speaker, facilitator and university lecturer with over 15 years of experience leading teams to design and deliver education and social change projects, innovative products and policy work to improve the lives of young people across Australia and Southeast Asia. It's a great pleasure to have Alex here for his experience, but also because Alex is representing young people. And clearly, looking back at Barry's presentation, there've been a lot of old people involved with adult learning. It's really important to invite and hear what Alex has to say about adult community education for young people. So thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Annette. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. And to Jenny and yourself, Annette, congratulations on 60 years of ALA. Yes, Tony, we all were young once. I also feel old myself. I've just become a parent of a 1-year-old and nothing has made me age quicker than the first 12 months of parenthood. I'm calling from, dialing in from, zooming in from the kind of beautiful southwest of Victoria, Boonwurrung and Boonwurrung country. And I just want to pay my respects to the First Nations peoples from where I'm calling in from and acknowledge traditional elders, any Aboriginal people that might be on the call with us, and also call out that we're coming off the back of NAIDOC week here in Australia. And, you know, we could do a lot worse than to start listening and learning from our First Nations colleagues who've been, you know, engaging in deep processes of learning and knowing and unlearning and reflection for over 60,000 years. And so that's kind of at the heart of the way we like to think about a learning and the vision that we have for education in Australia. You know, education from our perspective should always be about two things: building confident and connected global citizens who can participate and act freely for themselves in the society that they engage in. And also, secondly, to enable individuals to find meaningful and quality work. And as our colleagues have alluded to over the last few years, a lot of those you know, attempts to think about how we as individuals can engage in society and find meaningful and quality work have started to erode. And so for young, and particularly with the pandemic, we know that young people have been disproportionately affected. You know, already working in secure, casualised work, you know, the time it's taken them to go from full-time education and full-time work has almost tripled from that of their parents in the 80s. And so we really want to see young people, and indeed all people, have the skills, knowledge and confidence to thrive in a rapidly changing world. And for this to happen, they must be involved in the process of designing and developing education that they engage with. For us, you know, education should be demand-led and supply-sensitive, and we're pretty good at being demand-led, understanding where education might lead to from an employment perspective, but we can do a lot better at being more supply-sensitive and asking learners what it is they want to learn, why they want to learn it, how they want to engage with it, and where they want to take it. Based on FIA's research over the last 5 to 6 years, as people have alluded to, we know that the world is changing rapidly. And, you know, there's a range of interconnected global forces that are causing this shift. And despite what the media might tell us, it's not young people's fault for spending all their money on avocado on toast. Actually, there are a whole bunch of systemic challenges that they're facing that are beyond their control, and indeed all are beyond a lot of our control. Things like, you know, the rise of automation, the interconnected workforce, the casualization of the workforce, and as our colleagues talked about, you know, significant global challenges. And this is against the backdrop of, you know, young people, particularly now being estimated to have about 18 jobs over 6 careers. The idea that some of the most in-demand jobs today didn't exist 3 years ago. And so employers are starting to recognize this and are starting to demand a whole range of new skills that are expected to be latent, but are not, and are also not often the domain of traditional education. And so this is something that FIA has spent a lot of time thinking about over the last 3 to 5 years. Is yes, you still need to have foundational skills, reading, writing, arithmetic. You know, yes, you still need to have technical skills, whether that's as a hairdresser, as a surgeon, as a teacher, whatever it may be. But, you know, the increased focus on what we call enterprise skills, transferable skills, 21st century skills, becoming more and more important given the rise of automation and this interconnected global workforce. And so they're things like communication, problem solving, and the increase is significant. You know, we're talking about an increase in demand of up to 200% over a 3-year period. On top of those 3 skills, we're also wanting to see an increase in the focus on career management skills so that individuals are able to navigate this much more complex world, often mediated through an online platform, which for a lot of people, young or old, is completely new. I know myself, I'm getting Zoom fatigue and I'm not looking for a job. But just engaging in learning in a digital world as opposed to in a face-to-face world is a very different experience. And then finally, how do we start to privilege individual attributes and personal characteristics, particularly from people who might come from different cultural backgrounds, different personal circumstances, and have a range of lived experiences that aren't often thought of as contributing to effective learning. And so that's kind of a portfolio of 5 skills that we want to start to see embedded in learning and education for the future. And what needs to happen to get there? We, you know, believe in a process of design with stakeholders at the center of that. So as I said before, we're pretty good at being demand-led, but we're not very good at being supply sensitive. And we're not very good at co-designing, you know, using participatory methodologies that are often used in community development and community engagement that we could employ in educational design to ensure that actually students are involved in that process. I know that Jenny and I are often in a range of forums calling out for representation from the learners themselves. And we're still a long way off from getting there, unfortunately. And ultimately that should lead us to a place that privileges the whole person rather than just teaching to the test or teaching to a predetermined outcome. So ultimately we need a new mindset about what is required for education of the future. And there are kind of 3 key points here that I'm just going to point out among many others. So this is not an exhaustive list, but firstly, learning. So, you know, a more responsive and real world curriculum that allows students to develop that portfolio of skills, that gives them opportunities to practice that with their peers and with potential future colleagues so that they're able to learn and fail and test and evolve rather than doing it once off. Secondly is teaching. We need to raise the status of teaching, you know, immediately. And this could come through a range of different methods, but, you know, starting with, you know, proper salaries, proper investment in their development, you know, more teachers just in and of itself so that people aren't overworked. You know, we've done a lot of work in the school space and the average lifespan of a teacher in a high school in Australia is only a couple of years. So it says a lot about the pressure that they're put under. And part of that is a narrative that needs to shift around the values that, you know, our teachers make in their essential contributions to our livelihoods. And then finally assessing, you know, moving away from a system across the education domain that teaches to the test, to one that values the whole person. Is done in collaboration with industry, with students, and with community, and that recognises that people learn and succeed in different ways. We've been doing a lot of work on thinking about recognition and what we could recognise beyond just formal learning based on people's own personal circumstances. And finally, it's spaces like this which allow new ideas and new thinking and new connections to come to the surface in order to drive this type of change that is required. Organisations that back individuals who are often silent in processes of design and change, such as ALA, such as ASPE, such as FYA, are absolutely essential in part of this process of transformation. We need new diverse perspectives from people with lived experience, together with those who have technical experience, to tackle some of the big dynamic challenges that we face. Old thinking won't get us there. And if you're like me and you rejoiced in Biden winning the recent election over in the United States, and you've seen some of the early appointments he's made to his team and the commentary that he gave, which was that exact point. We face interconnected, significant systemic challenges, and we need a range of people that are representative of the communities we're working in to drive that change. Hopefully that won't end up as empty words or what a lot of us find often, and that is good ideas that get blocked by old thinking. But suffice to say, it is spaces like this which allow diversity, lived experience, and technical experience to converge and drive a conversation forward. So I'll finish there, and again, congrats on ALA for the 60 years, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was really, really interesting. And we have a question for Alex, and it's an easy question. You'll be able to answer it very quickly. So, what do you think?
No pressure.
What do you think the impacts of COVID-19 might have had on youth? That you think that COVID-19 may have had on youth, that you think adult learning organisations should consider if they were going to be demand-led going forward from here?
Thanks, Diana. So there's a couple of parts to that question. The first thing to say is the impacts on young people as a result of COVID-19. FYA has done some research on that, so you can find that the high-level impacts based on data analysis that we've done. The first thing to say is that the industries that were forced to shut down as a result of COVID, overwhelmingly the biggest impact on the industries that were forced to shut down, hospitality, retail, tourism, were largely the domain of young people. And so you're talking about 25 to 30% of young people who were now unemployed as a result of the pandemic. A lot of those young people were on casual contracts. And so, the lifeline from the government helped, but once it started to be retracted, there was nothing there for them to go back to. And so that immediate impact on their employment prospects, their salaries and their livelihoods is significant. The second thing to say is that it's about thinking about what we can do. Your question, Diana, like how can we respond to that? And what we would say is, access the data that provides you with an insight to where the jobs are. So we use a data set called Burning Glass, which is a huge big data set that has come from America, and it provides insight on job ads. So you're talking about a couple of million pieces of data at a national level. It's real. It's like real time, as opposed to a lot of publicly available data which lags a couple of months. And that gives us an insight into where jobs are appearing and growing, and what types of skills employers are asking of their graduates, so that you can start to then map that back to what's currently offered through education providers, whether that's through adult learning, vocational education, high school, or tertiary, and start to then design learning products and experiences that will enable individuals to take up those opportunities. And then finally, ask young people, put them, and everyone, which we all do, right, through these participatory methodologies, but don't ever stop asking individuals what they want, why they want it, and how they want to engage with it.
Thank you, Alex. We do have a question there for Colin. from Leonie. And the question is, how are you measuring the outcomes of ACE in New Zealand, particularly in relation to wellbeing?
Okay, we've developed a tool called the ACE Outcomes Tool, which measures confidence of our learners from when they start a program to when they end a program. And the government's bought into this tool, so it's got nothing to do with the qualification. It's basically on how their confidence is growing throughout a program. So that's one way we're actually measuring outcomes. And that kind of relates to wellbeing and has actually been brought into by government. So we're expanding that now as we go along with more and more providers. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you. And there's another question there, Colin. And it is an important question. And the question comes from Jenny. How much of the role does ACE play in supporting and enhancing traditional culture in Aotearoa?
We play a very important role. To start with, our organisation is bicultural. So on the board, we have 4 Maori and 4 Pakeha, white people. So all the way through, we are a bicultural organisation. So that's number one. Number two, we support Te Reo, which is a Maori language, by actually running programs for those who run programs. So we run programs for teachers on Te Reo, on Maori culture. So we're very, very aligned with Maori culture. It's infused throughout the organisation. We're very treaty-based. So yeah, we're very much into it. But we also, as a country, I think, much more a bicultural country because we had a Treaty of Waitangi, which we actively work on and support Maori. We've got a long way to go, but at least we are moving in the right direction, and we really strongly support that in everything we do.
Thank you so much, Colin. And there's no question that Australia could learn from New Zealand in terms of working with First Nations peoples. Okay, so can I just ask everyone to thank the panel members very much for the time and the insightful presentations that they gave us around the future and challenges of adult learning and education. So thank you so much. So interesting to talk about it.
Put the clap there, but thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we move on to, and I think, well, I was going to say we're exactly on time, but almost. Move on to introducing to you Dr. Trace Ollis. And Trace is a senior lecturer in adult and vocational applied learning at Deakin University in Australia. And she's also the principal editor of the Australian Journal of Adult Learning. And Trace will launch the special edition of AGEL. Thank you, Trace.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, it's certainly just been a fantastic session today, having everyone here that are really a part of the adult learning community. We are a community of people that all have a commitment to advancing adult learning in some way. And so I just want to acknowledge that. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I'm on beautiful Phillip Island today, which is the land of the Bunurong people, and I want to acknowledge their intellectual traditions and their ways of knowing, which have, of course, gone on for more than 60,000 years. So before I even commence to talk about the short life of Adult Learning Australia and the journal, the Australian Journal of Adult Learning, I want to acknowledge that wonderful history of rich knowledge that comes from our First Nations peoples. So Jenny, I also want to acknowledge all of the board members that are here, past and present, and also, I mean, because so many of you have a history in both Adult Learning Australia and the Journal and ASPE as well, and so many of the connecting organisations that are a part of the adult learning community in Australia. So I want to acknowledge you all, and I will acknowledge some specifically when I talk through this launch of the journal. Jenny very generously sent me an excerpt from, which was, I think, come from board minutes, Jenny, talking about the first edition of the journal and its humble origins. And
Yes, it did, Trace.
pardon?
It's from the original typed up notes on a typewriter from the first AGM, and they were commenting on the idea for a journal. So
That's right. And it refers to Arthur Helly again in his suggestion by means of a sale of a limited amount of advertising and by asking the various adult education bodies to take a quota of copies at the reduced price of 3 shillings compared with the usual price of 4 shillings for resale or disposal in other ways. Virtually all of the bodies agreed to accept their quota, and this enabled the printing of a sufficient number of copies to produce the first edition of the journal, which was a 48-page journal at a moderate cost. And of course, you know, here we are 61 years later, and I think we have to really thank Arthur Helly, because he clearly was a visionary and the first editor of the journal. So this 60th special edition of the Australian Journal of Adult Learning is a remarkable milestone, and one which I am honoured to write and speak to today. The journal commenced in 1961, as Barry spoke about in his wonderful presentation at the start of this session. I want to thank you, Barry, and also the reference group for bringing that wonderful history and heritage together that you did so well. And I'm so pleased that it's going to be there as an archive for the next 60 years to come. So the journal commenced in 1961 as the Australian Journal of Adult Education and has since had several name changes. There have been a number of notable editors in this time, and I'd like to acknowledge them. Arnold Healy was the first, followed by Des Crowley, John Shaw and Joan Alsop, who formed an editorial team, and also later, both at different epochs, edited the journal on their own. Other editors that followed were Barry Brennan, Roger Harris, of course, for an extraordinary period of 25 years. And I have to say, I think one of the first articles I ever published was under the editorship of Roger Harris. And what I did admire about him so much was how he always encouraged emerging scholars to publish in the journal. And I want to say that I've taken that heritage on board in my own role as the journal editor to really encourage new and emerging scholars to publish in AGEL, because I think that's a part of really ensuring that the adult learning scholarship and research continues on. So I want to particularly, and of course my predecessor, recent predecessor, Tony Brown, who also edited the journal for 5 years and did a terrific job as well. Co-editors Sue Shaw and Elaine Butler assisted at different periods, and a variety of guest editors contributed to the journal over the decades. All of the editors have been scholars of adult learning and have contributed to our understanding about what adult learning is today in both Australia and the Asia Pacific. AGEL, in its current name, has a first-rate international editorial board with leading scholars in adult education in Australia, the UK, Asia Pacific, Canada and the United States. Many of you are here today, and I thank you for being here. Ensuring the rigour and high standard of the publication continues. I want to thank and acknowledge the work of the editorial board. It is remarkable that a journal of this size and scope, such as AGEL, is still housed within a non-government organisation, and I want to acknowledge ALA in terms of housing the journal for 60 years, particularly in an age of open access journals, large publishing houses around the globe, housing the majority of journals in the world. And add to this, of course, the advent of Viper journals, you know, fee-for-service, open access journals, and the inevitable scholastic mode of production that comes with journals, including increased competitiveness, discourses of quality journals, and increased pressure for journals to produce large numbers of citations. AGEL and the not-for-profit organisation it's published by, ALA, of course, has thrived in difficult times and continues to maintain its commitment to advancing research and scholarship in adult learning and beyond. I want to thank our special edition editors, Associate Professor Annette Foley, who of course is also the chair of ALA, and Associate Professor Rob Townsend. They're both scholars in adult learning themselves, so I knew that when I asked them to be the special editors of this this important edition that they would do an incredible job, and they have. The special edition has articles from both leading and emerging scholars and focuses on adult learning in a variety of spaces. In a sense, it shows the changing nature of scholarship in the adult learning space over time, and is a snapshot of this is actually in this journal. So this particular edition has articles from leading and emerging scholars, focuses on adult learning in men's sheds, and that remarkable body of knowledge that is going on there in neighbourhood houses. Again, the same remarkable body of knowledge in terms of adult learning. Learning cities, histories of adult education in Australia and the workers' education movements, in an article from Bob Boughton, and that's a terrific historical article to have at this moment in time. The commissioned article by Barry Golding outlines the rich history and evolution of adult learning in Australia and poses questions for the vision splendour and the future of adult learning. Diana Amundsen's article outlines history of adult education in Aratoya in New Zealand, and that's really terrific as well. Finally, I'd like to, I guess I just want to make a couple of comments on this moment, this post-COVID moment, and what that means for adult learning and also adult learning research and scholarship. We as a part of the adult learning community need to push forward and continue to advance adult learning research and scholarship. We need to seize the moment that COVID-19 has presented us with in terms of the challenge associated with so many people who have lost jobs and the retraining that will take inevitably in terms of the workforce, and the centrality and importance of adult learning and the role that it can potentially play in this new retraining and reskilling of the workforce. I also want to speak about COVID-19 and the problems and issues that has posed for universities, and inevitably will impact on the scholarship of adult learning too. And so we as a community need to be pushing governments to fund appropriate, strategic and timely research that speaks to the importance of adult learning now and into the future, and of course recognises adult learning in Australia as the fourth sector of education. And so we need to seize that moment and be activist about this. So finally, a final word. I know Jenny did say that Tracy has a few quick words in the running sheet. I think she said that I had to make a few quick words. Well, she knows me, and and knows me well enough to know that I never can say a few quick words, but I do have one final thing that I want to say. I'd like to thank the Board of Directors, particularly this iteration of the Board of Directors of Adult Learning Australia, and the CEO, Jenny McCaffer, for their continuing support of the journal. Particular thanks must go to Catherine Devlin, who oversees the copy editing and publishing processes of the journal and drives much of the administrative and production work. We look towards the future of AGEL and it continuing to be a leading journal of adult learning in Australia now and into the future. So thank you very much, everyone. It's been a wonderful afternoon, and I look forward to having more discussions with you about adult learning scholarship and research in the future.
Thanks very much, Trace. Thank you. So we now come to the end of our celebration, looking back, casting forward, 60-year anniversary of ALA. I think it's been a fantastic 90 minutes, and we've kept on time, which is extraordinary. I also would like to thank all of you for your attendance. There are so many familiar faces as I'm looking at the attendance, and I'd like to acknowledge all of those, particularly those international guests, those international speakers, and all of the speakers today. It's been incredibly interesting. Again, I would encourage you to post questions. We can ask those questions of our panel members that were recorded presentations. And just a few final bits and pieces. Thank you. There goes my phone. Thank you to all of those people that have provided information for our archives. Some messages, quotes and images have gone out on our social media through Twitter and Facebook. We have had, we've made a short video for our website, and we would encourage you to have a look at that. We've added 60 years web page to our collection, and we will collection over the coming weeks. This webinar is recorded, so please, if you would like to look at it again, please do so. And for those of you that are interested, please register for the quarterly Quest magazine. And I would also encourage you, if you're not a member of ALA, please, if you're interested, join up. The final word from me, I think, and I'm going to echo Trace, but also I'm going to echo Neve's comment. We know that government recognises the idea of skills for learning, skills for development. That is funded through many components of adult and vocational education in this country. How do we, however, speak to government, engage with government, and raise the profile of the work that adult education and learning does, and lifelong learning does, in terms of the importance of funding health and well-being outcomes that we know happen as a consequence of much of the community-based adult education that happens across this country and others. So with that, we close with Heather Hewitt and her slide there, and I can't see it because I've got something in front of it. I've got people sending me all sorts of things. And Heather, for those of you that don't know, as the Australians will know that Heather is a very well-known presenter on a show called the ABC Backroads. She's been an incredible support to ALA and has presented for us before. And I think that she sums up the importance of the community-based approach to adult and community education that she has obviously seen as she's filmed her backroads across the country. So once again, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this 90 minutes webinar and the celebration of ALA of its 60 years. And let's hope there's another 60, although I'm not sure I'll be around for that. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
And then maybe people could unmute themselves, and we could just give a big clap and hoy for everyone.
Yep.
A big clap and hoy for everyone for coming along and for their contribution.
Thank
you. Woohoo!
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Thank you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for coming along.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.